This video is about balanced hairlines or balanced scalp. So I sort of want you to understand what that means. What makes a scalp look appropriate? Besides following the actual Norwood patterns, there are a lot of other criteria, and I'm just going to focus on one element of it. So, by the way, the Norwood pattern is something that I've lectured on, I've put in my textbooks, and it's something the junior person just blows over as if, hey, I know that already, but they don't really. And by teaching a course in Fort Lauderdale recently in February, it is now June of 2023, I was shocked that the students were able to nail down the Norwood pattern after just a short time. And it's so important to understand what Norwood patterns are there, because if you don't understand how a natural progression of hair loss is, you can't really recreate it. A story I've told recently, a gentleman that went to Turkey had a hairline that was way too wide, way too forward, and he's posting on social media how wonderful his hairline looks. He doesn't know, number one, it looks completely unnatural. Number two is that it's going to completely have problems in the next 5 to 10 years because it is actually going to start becoming front heavy, which is the subject of this discussion. The third component, looking at his donor hair, they've gone right up to the border of that donor. He's going to have a disaster on the backside where those grafts are going to fail within 5 years, 10 years at the very latest. And he doesn't understand those three components, which is a real problem. So what is a front heavy result? So to start with some concepts here, I'll start with one thing I've talked about, which is called the lid effect. The lid effect is, if you look at nowadays hair pieces, hair systems, they actually look quite natural many times, and you may actually, I see this on Instagram now, people showing all these hair systems that look relatively natural because they're all human hair woven. And people are wondering, is there something unnatural with them? Well, the number one reason why these look unnatural is that they don't match the temple zone, where the temple is receded all the way back here and the hairline is way up into the front, and it just looks off balanced or imbalanced. So the thing that you don't want is a result where this whole hairline is sitting way up in the front and there's nothing back here. So I had a gentleman that flew in for me a couple of weeks ago that I looked at he had a little bit of retained central forelock. In other words, he had a few hairs up here in the front, and he was wanting to have the hairline go all the way up to those hairs. And given where his temporal recession is or was, that would have looked crazy on him. And he had limited donor. I did an FUE procedure on him, and I needed him to be balanced. So I set his hairline farther back than he probably would have wanted so that these two areas matched, and he didn't have a front heavy result. So what is a front heavy result? So let's talk about the side view, okay? So here is the lateral hump. If you think of the head like a box, which is a concept I invented in terms of an educational tool to have people understand this better, the side of the head is the temple lateral hump. The top of the head is the mid-scalp hairline, and then the back of the head and the vertical scalp is mainly the vertex or the crown. So if we look at the lateral hump is defined as an upside down U, which is right here, okay? So where this hump sits should be a relative center point, not exactly, but a relative center point for the hairline position. Now, do I use this as my guide? Sort of. I have done this so many years, I have an instinctual understanding of how to draw this, but it's a cross-check on this. So let me explain what that means. So especially with advanced baldness, where the lateral hump can descend, if you draw a hairline that sits way up here, and the hump sits way back here, and the hair end point, because you can't do the crown, sits way in the front. Now let's take a look at a shift of the view. Let's turn to the side of this hump. I'm going to aim it here, and this is your hairline, and it ends right here. This is a problem. It has to sit somewhat on top of the lateral hump for it to look natural. Ideally, it's a 50-50 split, but that's oftentimes just not achievable because it's too many grafts wasted back here. On the back side, this is the posterior side, and especially if the crown is widening, this would not match. It's got to sit a little bit forward. So what I would say is it should sit no more than about 2/3 in front of the hump, and preferably with a little bit of temple built up to match it. But where this gentleman was wanting me to do this was his hairline out to here, which is an imbalance. It's not matched to where it needs to sit. So the hump is a good sort of delineation for understanding why I don't want this hairline sitting way in front of it. So that is what I call a front heavy result. It's also why hair systems, as I was mentioning, even the most natural human hair woven ones, well maintained, look slightly off because it's sitting so far in front of the lateral hump that it's imbalanced. And so you don't want a front heavy result. And that's what the concept of balance is. Here's the real problem with this. The real execution of balance requires a million judgments when you're designing that hairline. And so having done this for over 20 years, I have an instinctual feel when something is wrong. Great example, I don't know if I mentioned this in one of my videos recently. I've shot so many videos I can't recall what I've said or what I haven't. I was watching the James Bond movie Spectre, and actually I was watching it with a fellow hair surgeon, but he's a little bit more junior than I am. He hasn't done it as many years. And when I watched this movie, the first thing I saw in the scene is this guy is wearing a hairpiece. Now, it's a really good hairpiece. It's, if you want to know which guy it is, I don't know who it is, but he played Moriarty on the Sherlock Holmes video series with Benedict Cumberbatch or whatever. He was the evil guy. I think he was he evil guy? Anyways, Inspector, he was one of the guys, I think, serving on His Majesty's service, whatever. He was with M in one of the scenes. I didn't watch the whole movie with him. Anyways, by having done this so many years, I could see that his hairline was too wide and it was too strong, and it was definitely a hair system or hairpiece. It did not look like a hair transplant to me. I just have an instinctual ability to look at something. And here's a funny thing. The two people who are lay people looking at could not tell he had a hairpiece. And my colleague, who's been doing it fewer years than I have, could not tell it was a hairpiece. They were all shocked that I could tell in 1 second. And I said, by the way, the previous scene with the evil guy, he was also wearing a hairpiece. You couldn't tell. This is the reason why you need to find a surgeon who's done this for a lot of years, that has an instinctual understanding beyond the rules. And the rules are the critical element to begin with. And I've written 9 textbooks on hair transplant to teach the rules to the beginner surgeon. But this is why when I'm looking, I can already tell when something is off. And that's the reason for him, was his hairline was too front heavy and it was too wide. It did not follow the basic rules, and I can also see that it was too front heavy. So these are concepts that are very hard to educate, but these are things that, this is why, if you haven't watched my video, Non-Negotiable Hairlines, why I don't negotiate hairlines. Now, let me explain. I do negotiate some things. If you want a little widow's peak, don't like it, or you think the hairline's a little rounder than your taste, I can suppress it in. But generally speaking, the reason I design a hairline at a certain position and a certain shape is based on your temporal recession, it's based on your donor density, it's based on your age, it's based on the waves of miniaturization, it's based on concepts of where I'm going to see problems in the next 5 to 10 years. There's a million factors in my head when I design a hairline. And one of them, explored in this video, is the concept of not making front heavy, but instead very balanced hairlines that look good and that will age well for you.